Hey to all Metal Maniacs, and welcome back to another video on the Iron Horde channel. Those who have been following the videos I have been uploading from the start of this year, you know I have been focusing a lot on the 80s decade, and justifiably enough, because it is my favorite decade with regards to heavy metal. And not only the music, the style, the sound, everything as far as I'm concerned was perfect in the 80s, and it really helped to solidify heavy metal in all its glory. But obviously art doesn't stop, and although quality-wise not as proficient as the 80s, for this video I will be listing my 10 favorite heavy metal records released in the 90s. So I hope you're prepared, drink ready, off we go. Hi there again. If you're new here, the aim of this channel is to review albums and festivals, suggest bands, delve in the cultural aspect of heavy metal in general and more. So if you're interested in this content, please consider supporting this channel by subscribing, liking and sharing our videos on social media. So it is safe to say that during the 90s decade, heavy metal faced a lot of difficulties. It started kind of losing its appeal towards the youths of the time. During the mid-80s, a new style was emerging, a style which mixed hard rock and metal and punk without the speed, and this was referred to as grunge. During the early 90s, this genre gained a lot of popularity. A number of bands started emerging playing the style of alternative rock, let's say. Obviously, airtime on radio and TV stations became much more limited for heavy metal bands, and a lot of them either modified their sound to become more accepted within that alternative rock scene, or just split up or went on a hiatus. Some say when the going gets tough, the tough get going, and during the 90s heavy metal really needed the tough ones to keep pushing onwards the world of heavy metal, as the popularity gradually decreased. And the following bands on this list, most of them continuing over from the 80s, need to be further praised for hanging in there and still delivering the goods in the traditional heavy metal vein. I tried to vary the subgenres as much as possible on this list to cover a wider spectrum. Also, I left out albums by a number of very famous bands such as Sabbath, Maiden, Priest, and as much as possible. My contributions on this channel are for the viewers, actually to expand their knowledge rather than feeding them the same old. So you will get to hear, as most of you know, new bands and quite obscure ones as well. Also, the bands mentioned here are in chronological order from the earliest to the latest release. On with the first album, and from 1990 I bring you an album which I have already mentioned in my favorite death metal albums video, and this is Left Hand Path by Entombed, released with Earache Records. A record that kickstarted what is referred to today as Swedish death metal, and this album is so good. Great track one after the other. They were original sounding at the time, unique tone, intense riffs, and kind of in a league of their own in songwriting capabilities. Really brutal and evil stuff which defined basically death metal. Algeri Petrov, rest in peace, was kind of in his own world over here. His grunts resonated in every corner of this record. It had also a great production which really accentuated every detail on this record. I mean, what can I say more? This is really one of the landmark albums of death metal for sure. Next in line is another album I already made a video of, and this is Hammerhead by Bathory, released in 1990 with Noise Records. So, two albums from the 90s, two genre-defining albums, both of them from Sweden. This is kind of a prelude of what the 90s would bring in terms of heavy metal. Therefore, more extreme metal and more metal from the Scandinavian countries, making a hit and reaching a higher level of popularity. Hammerhead was the album that gave birth to what is nowadays referred to as Viking metal. Now, the term Viking metal is not related to the music but to the subject of the lyrics, just like, for example, white metal. The sound is more of an epic approach to that black metal, but it was really innovative, and I just love this record for the sense of escapism it transmits to me. It is not a common feeling to find in a brutal and savage kind of extreme metal album. Even the cover art, it's in its own way very epic. I know I will never get enough of this record because it is quite unique and it brought a different take on extreme metal. And moving on to 1991 with the album Symbol of Salvation by Armored Saint, released with Metal Blade Records. Maybe a surprise inclusion for most, but apart from really loving this band throughout their career, this was one of those records I used to listen very often, and anytime I put it on, it never disappoints me. So it's really close to my heart. Armored Saint came from the mid-80s period, with many bands from the US playing that mix of heavy and power metal like Omen, Liege Lord, Jet Panzer, etc., aided with the unique vocals on here of John Bush. Really gave the whole sound that kind of let's have a good time sound. It is the kind of an album you put on when you're kind of barbecuing with a cold beer in your hand. On most occasions they succeeded throughout their career in capturing this fun vibe. And this record is truly a great track one after the other, catchy riffs, great sound, brilliant rhythm section. For me, one of the highlights of the 90s heavy metal scene. Jumping on to 1992, and now we enter the realm of epic doom metal. And what better album to present this subgenre other than Candlemas, of course, than the magnificent album by Solitude, Eternus Beyond the Crimson Horizon, released with Roadrunner Records. In the 90s, Solitude Eternus released 5 full-length albums, which is quite a number of albums, this one being their second release, and quite possibly the one I have played the most throughout the years. Although truth be told, all of these albums are extremely good, so whichever you happen to stumble upon, rest assured you'll be listening to some brutally heavy epic doom metal of the highest quality. The melancholic and powerful voice of Rob Lowe does basically the rest. John Perez on guitars unleashes some great solos as well to enhance that overall epicness. For me, this is perfection, and there's not really much to say. Sometimes it still bewilders me how epic doom is so underrated within the heavy metal community. I've always said this and I will repeat it ad infinitum. In heavy metal there is no subgenre more heavy and brutal than epic doom metal. Others might feel more violent, but the ton of bricks kind of heaviness by epic doom is incomparable to me. Staying in 92, and we turn our attention to the album The Crimson Idol by Wasp, released with Capitol Records. The 90s brought quite a change in the musical approach of Wasp, and this record is the prime testimony of such a thing. Whereas before the sound was more of a savage, booze-fueled kind of heavy metal, on Crimson Idol we have a more mature and more kind of introspective take. The Crimson Idol is actually a concept album, somewhat of an autobiography of Blackie Lawless. When you listen to this album you will feel that this was a kind of a bigger project than the previous records. Each track had to fit the lyrics being sung, in terms of emotions especially, and then the culmination in the closing track, the great misconception of me gathering and joining parts from all the previous tracks in one sending off. At least that's how it feels to me. And another thing I want to mention is the over-the-top and brilliant drumming by Frankie Banali, who unfortunately passed away almost a year ago in August 2020. If I had to do a list with records showcasing the best drumming, this would definitely be one of them. Moving on to 93, and I bring you one of UK's pioneers in grindcore and death metal. Yes, I'm obviously referring to Carcass and the album Heartwork, released with Earache Records. This was the record through which I had, quite a number of years ago, discovered Carcass. I remember loving it at first. If I'm not mistaken, I had downloaded a track, not knowing the band, from a P2P program that was used in the early 2000s. Something similar to Napster, which I cannot remember the name yet. And anyways, I played this track over and over again, got the rest of the record and did the same. It's kind of my introduction almost to death metal. Then when I discovered Necrotism and Symphonies of Sickness, I started viewing Heartwork as a kind of a more simplified version, and a lot of years passed since I gave it a listen once more. And when this happened, I kind of started appreciating it again, and nowadays I value its contribution both to the whole subgenre of death metal and also to my trajectory into more extreme metal throughout my teenage years. There is a very nice balance of brutality with finesse, kind of, whereas previous records were all about the brutality and sheer bludgeoning kind of. This one is more controlled but still heavy. Nowadays it's definitely one of those records from the 90s that I have listened to the most, undoubtedly. And we have arrived at the 7th album, and from 1994 I bring you De Mysteris Dom Satanas by Mayhem, released with Death Like Silence Productions. This is actually the first black metal album I'm including in any of my videos. I'm definitely not the biggest black metal fan, but I still follow it quite a bit, but not on the level of traditional metal or doom or thrash, for example. The thing is, even though black metal is not my priority, yet I still yearn to listen to this record every now and then. The eerie atmosphere, the minimal production, the atypical vocals, they are like a breeze of chilled wind caressing your warm neck, which sends shivers down your body. I find myself looking for these feelings and for these atmospheres in heavy metal more than the capabilities of the musicians or the technique or whatever. The essence rests on how much of your inner feelings you can put in the art, and definitely this record is a true representation of this. One of my favorite black metal albums, and rightfully a staple for those who want to listen to black metal and get deeper into this subgenre. And staying in 1994, and in 8th position, I have included an album by one of my all-time favorite bands. I'm referring to Merciful Fate and the album Time, released with Metal Blade Records. What is there to say about Merciful Fate that hasn't been said already? Every metalhead knows the band, knows the quality of King Diamond's voice, the duo of Denner and Sherman, and this is just another quality output from them, which happens to be one of my favorite records from their 90s comeback. Like other Merciful Fate records, they are riff-fest, layered on plenty of melody and King's falsetto. There is also a Middle Eastern vibe throughout this record, which culminates in the track The Mad Arab. I've always liked these kinds of touches, which makes tracks and albums stand out without being too bombastic. As I said on a number of occasions, I'm not a big fan of making drastic changes to heavy metal in general. Although my introduction to the band was Don't Break the Oath, which easily remains amongst my top 10 all-time favorite records, this was the first LP of theirs I owned, and I have played it so much over the years, and each time I love every second of it. It's just another example of how good this band is and the great music they have released throughout their career. And next album from 1996, and probably the most surprising of the lot. It is one of those records that you need to listen to in your solitude with your headphones on, dimming the lights, and just absorbing the greatness. I'm referring to the album Somnium of Mutun by the Austrian band Aesthetic Fear, released with CCP Records. This album is made up of only 4 tracks, 2 instrumentals, interludes to a certain extent, and 2 very long tracks. The title track is 32 minutes long and the other track is around 18 minutes long. So you already get the idea that it is not a straightforward kind of record. It is not the kind of music you keep in the background or you play in a party or something like that. This is the more serious kind of metal. Sound-wise, what we have here is a kind of a mix between gothic, symphonic and doom metal. Those who know me might be more surprised now, as it is generally not the kind of musical mix I tend to listen to, but this record brings something more to the table. It has a sorrowful, epic feel to it. It incorporates some medieval instruments within it as well. It almost feels like a soundtrack to a movie. It is not music I would want to listen to in a live setting, but it is perfect, as I stated in the beginning, to listen to it alone and letting yourself drift away with the music. These feelings are not always easy to describe, but I guess you get the idea of what I'm aiming to convey here. And last on the list is from 1997, and definitely one of the albums that shaped my approach to heavy metal from my earliest years, delving into this type of music to the present day, basically. I'm referring to none other than local heroes Forsaken and the album Evermore, released with Storm Records. This is the debut album by the guys, and it sounds a bit different from later releases. Although Forsaken are known as an epic doom band, this album brings a mix of heavy metal, traditional doom, and some epic doom as well. There are some touches hinting to progressive elements in it, but they are quite minor compared to the rest. The guys tell me that this record kind of exemplifies the diversity of the influence of each member, and it is like they were still searching for that sound that they would eventually find, and which is nowadays synonymous with the band. Leo on vocals sounds like the bastard son of Ozzy on here. I think if I only would have to listen to the track The Healer, for example, I'm sure he would think it would be an unreleased Ozzy track or something like that. Anyways, I have listened to this album hundreds of times. I think I know every note and every lyric by heart, although this can be attributed to all of Forsaken's discography, basically. A great studio band, and most importantly, a great live band. Passion, heavy metal hardliners, over 30 years of standing their ground is what you get when you see them live, and you will feel this power on stage if you ever get to witness it, like I did on countless occasions, and I never get tired of it. I'm always thirsty to see and experience Forsaken live as much as possible. Those are my favorite records from the 90s decade. Again, this wasn't easy at all because there were thousands of records released, and it was extremely difficult to narrow it down to 10. Even though I spent quite some time shortlisting records for this and making sure I didn't forget any essential records, I'm quite sure once the comments will start coming in that I will be banging my head on the table once I start realizing the albums I have left out and forgot to include. But anyways, this is one of the downsides to making lists. Although actually, come to think about it, even if I did think about new albums, I don't know which albums from this list I would remove. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting. For being quite an underwhelming decade for metal, there still were some great records throughout, especially I think the first 5 years of the decade. Quite possible that was still the momentum carrying on from the 80s, as from 96 onwards the quality took a bit of a dip, let's say. Maybe the fact that metal returned a bit more towards the underground scene was actually a positive aspect of this decade, although small festivals were somewhat of a rare occurrence at the time, and only with the advent of the internet and the kind of revival post-2000s that the underground scene started bubbling up again with activities. Remember to subscribe, click the bell, like and share the video. Also check our affiliate links from which we get a small commission to no extra expense for you. Until the next one, stay safe and metal on. Cheers.